Somewhere in occupied France, in the winter of 1942, a woman is climbing a mountain. Not just any mountain. The Pyrenees, in November, in heavy snow, with a wooden leg. Behind her, an entire Nazi intelligence apparatus is hunting her down. Klaus Barbie, one of the most feared Gestapo commanders in all of occupied Europe, has her description on wanted posters plastered across southern France. He has reportedly said that he would give anything to get his hands on the woman they have come to call La Dame qui Boite, the Limping Lady. And yet, there she is, step after agonizing step, dragging a prosthetic leg called Cuthbert through snowdrifts that rise to the waist in places, breathing in air so cold it burns the lungs, covering ground that would challenge trained mountaineers in peak condition. She is not a trained mountaineer. She is a 36-year-old American woman from Baltimore, and she is about to pull off one of the most remarkable escapes of the Second World War. But, to understand how she got here, why she is here, why she chose to come back even after this, you have to start at the beginning. Because the story of Virginia Hall is not just a spy story. It is something deeper than that. It is the story of what happens when a person refuses, absolutely and completely, to be told what she cannot do. Virginia Hall was born on April 6, 1906, in Baltimore, Maryland, into a family of privilege and ambition. Her grandfather had been a sea captain. Her father, Edwin Hall, known as Ned, had built a comfortable life as a banker and businessman, and the family split their time between an apartment in the city and a country estate called Boxhorn Farm in Parkton, Maryland. By any measure of Edwardian American society, Virginia had what most people would consider a perfect starting point. She wanted none of it. From her earliest years, Virginia Hall was what her high school yearbook described as the most original person in her class. She attended the prestigious Roland Park Country School in Baltimore, where she was elected class president, became editor-in-chief of the school newspaper, and captained the field hockey team. She once went to school wearing live snakes as bracelets. There was absolutely nothing conventional about this woman, and she seemed proud of that fact. She went on to study at Radcliffe College and Barnard College, both elite institutions, where she concentrated on languages, economics, and international law. Then she continued her education in Europe itself, spending time in France, Germany, Austria, and Poland, soaking up culture and language with the kind of intensity that suggested she already knew, deep down, exactly where she wanted her life to go. She spoke French fluently. She learned German, Italian, enough Russian and Spanish to get by. By the time she returned to the United States in 1929, she was, in the words of one biographer, every inch the emancipated modern European woman. Her goal was clear. She wanted to join the United States Foreign Service. She wanted to be a diplomat. Ultimately, she wanted to be an ambassador. In 1931, she took a position as a consular clerk at the American Embassy in Warsaw, Poland. A starting point. A foot in the door. She transferred to Smyrna in Turkey, working out of the American Embassy there as well. She traveled. She worked hard. She performed well. She had every reason to believe the Foreign Service was just around the corner. And then came the moment that would redefine everything. It was 1933, and Virginia was in Smyrna, the city we now call Izmir, on the western coast of Turkey. She had joined a group of colleagues for a hunting trip. They were out looking for snipe, marsh birds that were a common quarry for the educated and sporting class in that part of the world. Virginia was competitive even on leisure trips. She wanted to be first. She was always moving faster than she needed to. While climbing over a fence, during the hunt, her shotgun discharged accidentally. The bullet struck her left foot. In the remote countryside, far from immediate medical care, the wound became infected. By the time surgeons could treat her, gangrene had set in. There was no choice. Her left leg was amputated below the knee. She was 27 years old. Most people facing that kind of trauma, the physical shock, the pain, the sudden and permanent alteration of their body and their sense of self, would have needed months simply to process the loss. Virginia Hall was back at work within weeks. She was fitted with a wooden prosthetic leg, held in place with leather straps. It was heavy. It was painful. It caused sores on the stump of her leg that would trouble her for the rest of her life. She walked with a pronounced limp that she could never fully disguise, no matter how hard she tried. She named the leg Cuthbert. The name is peculiarly British, a little wry, the kind of name that suggests she had decided, quite deliberately, to treat this unwanted appendage as an eccentric companion rather than a symbol of defeat. Cuthbert was inconvenient and difficult and frequently gave her trouble, but he was hers, and she refused to be defined by him. She returned to work, this time at the American consulate in Venice. She refused special treatment. She navigated the city's notoriously difficult terrain, all those steps, all those cobbled bridges, without complaint. She proved, day after day, that she could do the job, and then she applied formally for the United States Foreign Service. She was rejected. She applied again, rejected again and again. The reason was always the same. The State Department had a rule. Personnel with physical disabilities, specifically the loss of a limb, were ineligible for the Foreign Service. It did not matter how many languages she spoke. It did not matter how well she performed her duties. It did not matter that the State Department employed only 6 women among several thousand Foreign Service officers at the time, and that none of them were ambassadors. The door was closed, and then closed again, and then locked. Virginia Hall's response to this was not to give up. It was to find a different door entirely. By 1939, Europe was already crackling with the electricity of coming catastrophe. Virginia resigned from the State Department and did the only thing that made sense to her. She went to France, not to hide from the war that was clearly coming, but to be in it. In February 1940, she signed up as an ambulance driver for the French Army's 9th Artillery Regiment. She kept her prosthetic leg a secret. She drove wounded soldiers through combat zones and from field positions to military hospitals, doing work that required physical endurance and absolute nerve. She did it on one good leg and one made of wood. Then France fell. In June 1940, the German war machine completed its stunning 6-week conquest of France. The WW armistice split the country in two, a German-occupied zone in the north and the so-called Free Zone in the south. Governed by the Vichy French regime, a collaborationist government that was, in practice, a puppet of Berlin. Virginia made her way to Spain, then to England. She was in London wondering what came next, when fate intervened in the form of a chance meeting. On her way through Spain, she had crossed paths with a man named George Bellows. He was a British intelligence officer, though he did not immediately advertise this fact. He was, however, very good at recognizing useful people. He was impressed by Virginia, by her composure, her command of languages, her obvious intelligence, and the quiet intensity that seemed to radiate from her. He gave her a phone number. A friend in London, he said, who might have work for her. That friend was Nicholas Boddington, an officer with the newly created Special Operations Executive, the SOE. The SOE was Winston Churchill's answer to the fall of France. Its mandate, as Churchill himself described it, was to set Europe ablaze. It was to conduct espionage, sabotage, and subversion in Nazi-occupied territory, and to build resistance networks that could harry and disrupt German forces from within. It was unconventional, it was dangerous, and, crucially, it had no prohibition against employing women or people with physical disabilities. Virginia Hall joined the SOE in April 1941. After a period of training, weapons handling, communications, coding and decoding, security procedures, and what sources describe as realistic Gestapo interrogation simulations, including water torture, she was given her assignment. Go to France, build a resistance network, and do not get caught. Her cover: she was a correspondent for the New York Post. Her code name: Diane. Her network, when she built it: Heckler. On August 23, 1941, Virginia Hall arrived in Vichy, France. She was the first female SOE agent to take up long-term residence in France. Her supervisors, by most accounts, did not expect her to last more than a few days. Lyon was the beating heart of resistance in southern France, and Virginia made it her base of operations almost immediately. The city was a dangerous place for what she had in mind. The Gestapo and the French Sûreté were both active and aggressive. Informants were everywhere. People who were caught collaborating with the resistance faced torture, deportation to concentration camps, and death. The punishments were brutal and public, designed to terrify. Virginia dressed plainly. She gave up her fashionable Parisian wardrobe for nondescript, forgettable clothes. She interviewed people for the New York Post, giving herself an entirely plausible reason to ask questions and go places that might otherwise raise suspicion. She began building contacts, slowly, carefully testing each person before trusting them with anything important. Her instincts for security were extraordinary. SOE agents were guided by a principle that the official SOE historian, M.R.D. Foote, once described as dubito, ergo sum. I doubt, therefore I survive. Virginia Hall embodied this principle completely. When she sensed a risk, she acted on that instinct without hesitation, regardless of what London headquarters thought. In October 1941, she declined to attend a meeting of SOE agents and resistance figures in Marseille. She had a bad feeling about it. Too many people in one room, too many security gaps. She refused to go. The Gestapo raided that meeting. 12 agents were arrested in a single sweep. Virginia's survival instincts had just saved her life. But here was the thing about Virginia Hall. She did not simply survive, she built. By late 1941 and into 1942, the Heckler network had grown to a reported 90 agents operating across southern France. Through the American consulate in Lyon, where the vice consul, George Whittinghill, quietly became a convert to her cause, she was able to send coded intelligence dispatches through diplomatic channels into Switzerland, and from there to London. Downed Allied airmen were told to make their way to the consulate and ask for Olivier. Olivier was Virginia. Her closest allies in Lyon included a doctor named Jean Rousset, who created an asylum for the mentally ill that doubled as a hiding place for agents and escapees, and a woman named Germaine Guérin, who owned one of the city's most prominent brothels. Germaine ran safe houses out of her establishment and passed on intelligence that her employees gathered from the German officers who frequented the place. In the shadow world Virginia Hall inhabited, a brothel owner was exactly the kind of asset you needed. The Heckler network provided London with intelligence on German troop movements, ammunition depots, fuel storage locations, and industrial production. It helped downed Allied airmen escape back to Britain. It supplied weapons and money to resistance fighters. And it was all held together by a woman with a limp and an American accent, who somehow kept reinventing her appearance and her story fast enough to stay one step ahead of a growing German hunt. But the single most audacious thing Virginia Hall did during this first period in France had nothing to do with intelligence gathering. It was a jailbreak. When the 12 agents were swept up in the October 1941 raid on Marseille, Virginia took their capture personally. These were her people. Some of them were SOE agents she had worked alongside. By early 1942, she had learned that they had been transferred to an internment camp at Mauzac, near Bergerac, a prison that was, by all accounts, extremely difficult to escape from. Virginia first tried to get them released through official diplomatic channels, traveling to Vichy to meet with American Admiral William Leahy and use every connection she had to argue for their freedom. That went nowhere, so she decided to break them out herself. Her plan was elegantly simple, which is often the mark of brilliant improvisation under impossible conditions. She contacted Gabby Bloch, the wife of one of the prisoners, a man named Jean-Pierre Bloch, who already had permission to visit the prison regularly to bring her husband food. Virginia instructed Gabby to smuggle things in, hidden at the bottom of food containers, specifically sardine tins, and tools concealed inside them. One of the 12 prisoners was a wireless operator named Georges Béguet. He had already managed to get letters out to Virginia through whatever informal channels existed inside the camp. Now, using the tiny tools smuggled in through Gabby's visits, Béguet set to work on something extraordinary. He used the sardine tins and the tools to fashion a working key to the door of the barracks where the prisoners were being held. Meanwhile, Virginia was working the outside, assembling safe houses, securing vehicles, coordinating a chain of helpers, and obtaining 2 French police uniforms to be used in the escape. A priest, also part of the scheme, smuggled a radio into the prison. Béguet began transmitting to London from within the facility itself, an act of extraordinary nerve. On July 15th, 1942, all 12 prisoners walked out of Mauzac. They spent 2 weeks hiding in the surrounding woods while an intense manhunt raged around them. Then, one by one, they filtered through to Lyon, met up with Virginia, and were smuggled via Spain back to England. SOE historian M.R.D. Foote would later call the Mauzac escape one of the most useful operations of the entire war. Several of the escapees returned to France and became key leaders within SOE networks. The Germans were incandescent with fury. The Gestapo flooded Vichy France with 500 additional agents, all focused on Lyon. The Sicherheitsdienst, the SS intelligence service, intensified its efforts to infiltrate and destroy the resistance networks. And in Lyon itself, the head of the Gestapo, a man named Klaus Barbie, became personally obsessed with finding the woman behind it all. The French had a name for her now, La Dame qui boite. The Lady Who Limps. Wanted posters began appearing across southern France. One reportedly bore the words, "The enemy's most dangerous spy. We must find and destroy her." Barbie himself, by multiple accounts, offered to give anything to get his hands on her, and he was under the impression she was Canadian, which tells you something about how little the Germans actually knew about her. They had the limp. They did not have her name, her nationality, or her face. Barbie would later become known as the Butcher of Lyon, personally responsible for the execution or deportation of thousands of resistance fighters and Jewish civilians. He tortured prisoners himself, in person, at his headquarters in the Hotel Terminus. His pursuit of Virginia Hall was not casual. He was not simply doing his job. He wanted her. He never got her. But by late 1942, the situation in France was deteriorating rapidly. Virginia had been in the country for 15 months, longer than any other SOE agent in France at the time. She had survived through discipline and instinct, but those alone could only hold so long. In August 1942, the network she had been quietly handling messages for in Paris, a group called the Gloria Network, was revealed to have been infiltrated. The man who had penetrated it was named Robert Alish, a Roman Catholic priest who was, in fact, an agent of the Abwehr, German military intelligence. He had already been worming his way into Virginia's own contacts, and because of him, German operators had decoded SOE messages and fed false information back in return. Wireless operators she had worked with were being arrested. The network was bleeding from within, and she did not yet fully understand the extent of the damage. Then, on November 7th, 1942, the American consulate in Lyon delivered a warning. The Allies were about to invade North Africa. German retaliation would be swift and total. They would occupy all of Vichy France, and when they did, Klaus Barbie would have free rein across the entire country. Her police contacts, the ones who had quietly looked the other way when she needed them to, would no longer be able to protect her. She had hours, perhaps less. Virginia Hall told no one she was leaving, not Jean Rousset, not Germaine Guérin, not her closest contacts. She simply vanished the way a good spy vanishes, completely and without warning, leaving nothing behind that could compromise the people she cared about. She took a train from Lyon to Perpignan on the southern edge of France, as close to the Spanish border as the rail lines would take her. And then she walked. The Pyrenees Mountains stretch roughly 270 miles from the Atlantic coast to the Mediterranean, forming a natural wall between France and Spain. The passes that cross them range from manageable to genuinely ferocious, and in November, under winter conditions, even the easier routes become serious undertakings. Virginia's route crossed a pass at approximately 7,500 feet above sea level. The total distance she covered over 3 days was close to 50 miles. The snow in places was waist-high. She had a guide. She was not doing this entirely alone, but she was doing it with a wooden leg that dug into the raw stump of her amputation with every step, turning the skin there into a bloody wreck. The cold was the kind of cold that gets inside your clothing and stays there. There was no margin for weakness, no moment where she could simply stop and let someone else take over. At one point during the crossing, she sent a message to SOE headquarters in London. She said she was fine, but Cuthbert was giving her trouble. London sent back a message that, under any other circumstances, might have been darkly funny. Not knowing that Cuthbert was her leg, they told her, if Cuthbert is troublesome, eliminate him. She kept walking. 3 days later, Virginia Hall crossed into Spain. She had made it. SOE's longest surviving agent in France, the woman who had built the Heckler network from nothing and orchestrated one of the war's most celebrated prison breaks, had walked through the Pyrenees in winter on a wooden leg and lived. Spain promptly arrested her for crossing the border illegally. The American embassy, after some effort, secured her release. She made her way to Madrid and from there back to London. When she arrived, she asked SOE for permission to return to France. Maurice Buckmaster, the head of SOE's French section, refused. She was too well known, he said. The Gestapo knew her description. The risk was too great. Virginia Hall did not accept this gracefully. She pushed back. She argued. She told Buckmaster, in language that has been described as direct to the point of bluntness, that her neck was her own, and she was willing to risk it. He still refused. So she applied to the American Office of Strategic Services. The OSS, the forerunner of the CIA, said yes. In March 1944, Virginia Hall returned to France for the second time. She could not parachute in. Cuthbert made that impossible. Instead, she arrived by Royal Navy motor torpedo boat, coming ashore by dinghy on the Brittany coast in the dead of night, carrying a battered old suitcase. Inside that suitcase was a state-of-the-art wireless radio, but you would never have known it to look at her. The woman who waited ashore appeared to be an elderly French peasant. Her hair had been dyed a dull graying black. She had filed her own teeth down to resemble the worn teeth of a rural farm worker. She wore heavy, shapeless clothing, full skirts, thick blouses, and oversized sweater that disguised her tall, athletic build. She shuffled her feet when she walked, turning the limp caused by Cuthbert into the natural shuffle of an old woman who had spent decades working the land. Her forged identity papers said she was Marcel Montagne. Her OSS code name was Diane. The Gestapo had old photographs from her days as a journalist. They had descriptions of a tall American woman with reddish hair and a noticeable limp. They were looking for her everywhere. They walked right past her. She settled initially in the rural French countryside south of Paris, living with a sympathetic farmer named Eugene Lopinat, tending cows by day and transmitting coded messages to London by night. She sold cheese and milk at the local market, making small talk with German soldiers who had no idea they were speaking to the woman their superiors most wanted to capture. Once, a group of German soldiers arrived to search the farmhouse while she was completing a radio transmission in the loft. She stored the radio under crates, came downstairs in her peasant disguise, and told the officer who confronted her, in a carefully roughened, aged voice, that she was the farmer's cook. The soldiers searched the premises. The radio was not found. She went back upstairs and finished her transmission. Throughout this period, Virginia was also tracking German troop movements, locating safe drop zones for weapons, reestablishing contact with resistance groups, and organizing the scattered and sometimes fractious bands of Maquis fighters. The rural partisans who would be essential to the coming Allied invasion. The OSS had given the Saint Network a male leader, a 62-year-old man named Henri Losuc, because it was considered too radical a thought that a woman could lead an intelligence network. Virginia was officially his wireless operator. She did considerably more than operate the wireless. By July 1944, D-Day had come and gone, and the liberation of France was finally underway. Virginia moved to the Haute-Loire region in central France, discarded her peasant disguise, and established open headquarters in a barn near Le Chambon-sur-Lignon. Here she faced a different kind of battle. The bruised egos of local resistance commanders who had difficulty accepting direction from a woman. One Maquis leader reportedly called her a ginger witch. Another accepted her weapons and money, but balked at taking her advice. Virginia wrote to OSS headquarters with characteristic bluntness, noting that they sent her people ostensibly to work with her, but did not give her the authority to make them listen. She found ways around it. Money and weapons, it turned out, were powerful tools for winning grudging cooperation. 3 plane loads of supplies arrived in late July, and the money she distributed for operational expenses bought the acquiescence, if not the warmth, of the pricklier commanders. The 3 battalions of Maquis fighters under her coordination, roughly 1,500 men in total, undertook a sustained campaign of sabotage and harassment against the retreating German forces. They blew up 4 bridges. They derailed freight trains. They severed key rail lines in multiple locations and brought down telephone networks. They killed approximately 150 German soldiers and captured an additional 500. They cleared the entire department of Haute-Loire of German soldiers before the American army arrived in September 1944. Virginia also transmitted 37 separate intelligence messages to London, between July 14th and August 14th alone, including what is reported to have been the first intelligence identifying that the German General Staff had moved its headquarters from Lyon to the city of Le Puy. When a Jedburgh team finally parachuted in on August 25th to assist with the resistance battalions, Virginia noted with dry satisfaction that this occurred after the Germans had already been driven from the department and Le Puy had already been liberated. She had done it without them. On September 23, 1945, in a small private ceremony in Washington, Major General William Wild Bill Donovan, the head of the OSS, pinned the Distinguished Service Cross to Virginia Hall's chest. It was America's second highest military decoration for valor. Virginia Hall was the only civilian woman to receive it during the Second World War. President Harry Truman had wanted to make the presentation himself at a public White House ceremony. Virginia declined. She was not interested in public recognition. She still had work she wanted to do, and a ceremony in the White House would compromise her ability to continue doing it covertly. The only outsider present at Donovan's private ceremony was Virginia's mother. The British awarded her the Member of the Order of the British Empire. France gave her the Croix de Guerre with palm. The intelligence community, and in the quiet, private way that such communities acknowledge these things, recognized that what Virginia Hall had accomplished was essentially without precedent. She was not finished. After the OSS was dissolved and the Central Intelligence Agency was created in its place, Virginia joined the CIA in 1947, one of the first women hired by the new agency. She spent the next 15 years in the intelligence business, supporting covert operations aimed at preventing Soviet influence from spreading across Europe. Her methods from France, the resistance networks, the safe houses, the principle of cultivating local assets and working through them, became a template for Cold War operations. But the CIA of the late 1940s and 1950s was not always comfortable for a woman who had run intelligence networks in occupied France. She was given desk jobs. She was passed over for promotions and field assignments, for which she was unquestionably the most qualified person in the building. She resigned once in frustration, was rehired, and pushed back against bureaucratic limitations the same way she had pushed back against the State Department 2 decades earlier, persistently and without apology. In 1966, she reached the mandatory CIA retirement age of 60. She retired to a farm in Barnesville, Maryland, with her husband Paul Guyot, a fellow former OSS operative she had met during the liberation of France and quietly married in 1957. She tended her garden, she made cheese, she raised French poodles. She told almost no one anything about what she had done. Virginia Hall left no memoir. She gave no interviews. She spoke almost nothing about her wartime years, even with close family members. Her niece, Lorna Catling, recalled meeting her aunt after the war, pale, white-haired, wearing what Catling described as crappy clothes. No ceremony, no drama, just a woman who had come home from something enormous and had no particular interest in talking about it. She once explained her silence this way. Too many of her friends had been killed for talking too much. Germaine Guérin and Jean Rousset, her 2 closest allies in Lyon, had both been captured by the Germans and sent to concentration camps. They survived. Barely. Others did not. Of the 41 female agents the SOE sent to France during the war, 15 never came home. Virginia Hall did not take her survival lightly. She did not dress it up in glory. She simply carried it, quietly, for the rest of her life. She died on July 8, 1982, in Maryland. She was 76 years old. She is buried at Druid Ridge Cemetery in Pikesville, Maryland. In the years since her death, the world has slowly begun to catch up with what Virginia Hall actually was. In 1988, her name was added to the Military Intelligence Corps Hall of Fame. In 2016, a new CIA field agent training facility was named the Virginia Hall Expeditionary Center. In 2019, the CIA Museum dedicated an individual section to her story, one of only 5 operatives ever to receive that distinction, alongside men who went on to lead the entire agency. That same year, Time magazine chose her to represent 1943 in a retrospective series celebrating remarkable women across the decades. A painting of her hangs in one of the main corridors near the entrance to CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia. It shows her transmitting from a barn in France, the power for her radio generated by a bicycle pedaled by hand in the farmyard outside. A fragile, improbable lifeline connecting occupied France to the Allied command in London. That image, a woman in peasant clothes, alone in a barn, sending coded messages into the dark, captures something essential about who she was. No army behind her, no backup coming, just intelligence and judgment and the absolute refusal to quit. The Gestapo spent years trying to find the Limping Lady, Klaus Barbie, the Butcher of Lyon, a man who personally tortured thousands of prisoners and sent thousands more to their deaths. Wanted desperately to get his hands on her. He never did. He died in a French prison in 1991, convicted of crimes against humanity, having spent decades hiding under a false name in Bolivia. Virginia Hall outlived his crimes by 9 years and died in her own bed. The woman who was rejected by the Foreign Service for having a wooden leg became the most decorated female civilian of the Second World War. The woman who was told she could not be a diplomat built something more consequential than any embassy, a network of resistance that reached across an entire occupied country and helped turn the tide of a war. The woman with the limp, who the Germans tracked by that limp, who became famous because of that limp, used it as a disguise, shuffling through German checkpoints in the costume of an old farm worker, carrying a radio transmitter in a battered suitcase, never once being caught. She once said she was just doing her job. The Gestapo called her the most dangerous Allied spy in all of France. History will have to decide who was right about that. If this story moved you, subscribe to WW2 Tales, because history is full of people like Virginia Hall. People who worked in the dark, asked for nothing in return, and shaped the world without anyone knowing their name. We are here to find those stories and tell them properly. See you in the next one.